I have the pleasure to say that this is our 14th year. Yeah. We've been doing this for 14 years, and every year I learn a lot more. And every year we're also faced with new challenges. And over the last year, we at the National Minority Equality Forum have been doing a lot of thinking about who we are and what the future looks like, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that. But before I go into that, I want to first thank everyone for coming out. Yeah, I'm getting a little feedback. I think I've got two mics going on. Okay, is that better? Or should I shut this one off? I got more microphones than Carter got liver pills. Remember Carter's liver pills? Okay, is that better? Okay. Congresswoman Kelly is going to be joining us later on this afternoon, and she'll bring her greetings then. As always, we're excited to be working with her and her team. Thanks. I want to talk to you a little bit about a transformation that we've been going through. If you can bring up the slides. Because a lot of what we're going to talk to you about at this summit has to do with the way in which we're starting to think about healthcare in the 21st century. Despite what you hear in Washington, we are in the middle of an enormous transformation. We are at the edge of doing some really incredible things. And what we've been thinking about and concerned about is, so how do we make sure that no community gets left behind? That as we move into this 21st century, that all communities benefit from the transition. And the way we've been thinking about it is, how do we begin to control health outcomes? So if I can, do I advance my slides? Have you guys got control of them? How do we do this? All right, put them up. We good? Well, we jump to the back. Let's see if I can figure out how to get it. Can we start it at the beginning? There you go. Well, further back. We're getting there. Good, thank you. Great, thank you. I want to talk to you this morning about moving beyond health disparities. And I know health disparities has been a vision and an important part of our conversation. And talking about leaving that world of health disparities and entering into a new era will give us all a bit of pause. But I want to share with you what we've been thinking about at the National Minority Equality Forum. So I'm going to talk to you about moving beyond health disparities, and then I'm going to talk to you about building healthy, sustainable communities. So the modern era of health disparities, and excuse me, my curse is I'm a historian, so I'm always going back and trying to understand the past. I can't get to the future until I understand the past. So I want you to understand how I'm thinking about the past and how that set us up for the future. So the modern health disparities movement really gets started with the Heckler Report in 1985. It documented that minority populations had disproportionate health outcomes from the majority population. Prior to that, at least many thought, prior to that, that there was some question about whether minority health was different, African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans from the majority population. And the Heckler report put that to rest. But actually, the conversation about health disparities started in the 1890s with W.E.B. Du Bois. At that time, Du Bois was talking about the newly emancipated slaves, who for the first time had to take on the issue of health care. You know, in slave society, they didn't have to worry about health care. It got to a fashion, health care. But with emancipation came these new challenges. And Booker T. Washington picked it up in 1914 and launched National Negro Health Week, which was also part, at the same time, Carter G. Woodson was launching National Negro History Week. And this movement by Booker T. Washington actually gets picked up by the federal government. And all the way up and through World War II, the federal government was involved in health disparities in the minority community, again, particularly focused on this newly emancipated proclamation. By 1914, a lot of the people who had been born in slavery had reached middle age, 30s, 40s, and so had to contend with their health issues. Whether you do the Heckler report or you start with Booker T. Washington, what the health disparities movement was about was referencing minority health to the majority population. What the purpose was to norm minority health to the majority in terms of mortality, prevalence of diseases like diabetes, heart disease, et cetera. And so success in that movement was equity in terms of we all die at the same rate. I mean, that's really, at the end of the day, if you sum it up, that's what it was talking about. As we started to think about that and think about where technology is taking us, what we started to say is we want some new goals. The most important goal that humanity has to face in the 21st century is sustainability. How do we sustain ourselves? Now, this conversation about sustainability really gets launched in the 1980s with climate change. I know some people don't believe in climate change, but there was a conversation about climate change in the World Health Organization. And the language of sustainability starts to grow there. And the idea was, how do we live our everyday lives and not destroy the environment for our children and their children? How do we find a balance where we use the resources around us that we need to do to promote high quality lives for ourselves and not destroy the environment around us? So if you Google right now, sustainable health communities, you're going to find the Department of Energy, the Department of Transportation, and the Department of Housing have programs around building sustainable communities. What I was struck by when we looked at that was that Health and Human Services, the Department of Health, was not in the conversation. How can you talk about sustainability and you're not talking about healthcare? Sustainability is all about healthcare. It's all about healthcare. So as we started to think about this, we had a deeper thought. One that we don't say out loud, that we whisper to ourselves, but we have not had the courage to say out loud. And that is, we want to control health outcomes. Living a life in which you are at the whim of every force. You wake up in the morning and you shake your body parts and you gotta make sure your fingers, toes, and legs and whatever is working, and you can still inhale and walk down the street. That's no way to live. That is just no way to live. And so I think, and we're talking internally, I know it sounds like a big word, controlling health outcomes, daring to say that out loud. What gave me, at least personally, courage in that, Apple launched a company about 2 years ago called Calico. I tried to get them to come here. But you know, these wonky people, they don't want to come talk to us average folks. They all want to just get together and do wonky stuff. And they've set out for themselves the goal of attacking aging. They think that they can control aging, and that's what Apple is investing in. And I looked at that and said, well, if a major corporation is willing to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into that struggle, perhaps that gives us all permission to think even broader about what we are doing. So when I say controlling health outcomes, I want to be a little bit more precise with you about what I'm talking about. In the immediate sense of the word, I'm talking about making sure that every individual has access to best modern therapy, that we are measuring our healthcare system by its capacity to avoid hospitalizations, emergency room visits, disability, medical errors, and reducing mortality. Those are hard numbers that we can establish. There was a group back in the 1974. They came up with a model. It was called amenable mortality. Go Google it. You can actually get the paper for free. Download it. It was funded by NIH. And the metric that they were setting up was avoidable events, measuring health systems by their ability to prevent ability events. It got overtaken, that sort of model got overtaken by comparative effectiveness and a whole bunch of other stuff that wanted to look at what providers were doing, et cetera, but wasn't measuring the whole health system and how the health system. And what I'm saying to you is that if you think deep about it, in a real sense, some of the hospitalizations, emergency room visits, mortality is an output statement from our system. It's a measurable productive capacity of how we've decided to distribute and use what I would call health information. So when we talk about something like health disparities, for example, what we're saying is that we have certain zip codes in the United States where we have decided collectively, we've done that, to allow higher hospitalizations, higher mortality, shorter life expectancy. You read it all the time. Your zip code predicts your life expectancy. That's an output statement. It's an output statement that W.E.B. Du Bois saw, that Booker T. Washington saw, that the Heckler reports wrote about. So our conversation, what we want to talk to you about at this meeting is how do we move beyond? How do we start having a conversation about controlling things? Controlling them in the immediate sense that we're making sure that everyone has access, and in the future tense, How do we innovate? How do we get smarter? How do we build learning communities so that we are mobilizing our community to make this enormous investment that we have the capacity to do? We are the only life form on this planet that knows how to heal itself, and we have to use it. I think that's the point of the conversation. So that's what we see in terms of a future. So let's talk a little bit about what does building a sustainable community actually mean? What are we really talking about? So the most controversial thing I'm going to say to you, and it won't sound controversial, but it's absolutely controversial, is that to build real sustainable communities, it has to be the prime directive of the society. The minute you subordinate anything else to that, game over. It's just the way it has to be, because it is the way in which we organize ourselves in order to learn quickly, distribute the information across our populations. And it's a larger sense. I'm not just talking about healthcare, we're talking about how do we work, and the workplace is changing dramatically. How do we deal with the real critical, think about it. What I'm saying to you is, how do we deal with the homeless? In a model like that, how do you deal with the homeless, right? Those are tough, important questions that we have to answer. We are at a place right now, to show you the journey. There's a part of our community that says that everyone doesn't deserve health care, that you should have the health care that you can afford. What I'm saying to you is that health care, health insurance, is a social determinant of health. It is a social determinant. It's more important than building a playground. It's more important than having walking space. It is because the minute you deny access, you are going to elevate that person's risk for a shorter life. Immediately, the moment you do it, you've elevated their risk. And so those are deep, difficult questions that we have to tackle. So it means, the historian in me thinks about when the telephone came into existence, or electricity came into existence, or the internet, we all said we can leave no community behind. Every community, rural community, whatever community, can't afford it community, they have to have a telephone. They have to be on the internet. They have to have electricity. Those are conversations that we've had and we've done, but we struggle with this conversation about healthcare. And we need to have it. It has to be a public conversation. We have to struggle with it and find answers for it. What I'm also saying is that sustainability is not a fixed quantity. It's not one size fits all. We're not saying that everybody's going to be in the same boat. Each community is going to have to help define itself. And from the African American experience, I'm just going to be personal for half a second. It wasn't until 1965 that we could start to have a conversation about what community we wanted to live in, that we collectively wanted to live in. And there are lots of others in our community who share that fate, and they too have to have a voice in designing their future and making sure that they get to live long, happy, quality lives. I mean, that's the objective here. This word equilibrium, it too has a lot of meaning. And what it means to me anyway, in this context, is that we are going to live in a world that constantly changes, that when we talk about sustainability, we're not talking about permanency, that the world is not going to change, that it's always going to be the same. Guaranteed, it's always going to change. And so what we have to do is that we have to be smarter. We have to be able to understand the environment and the context that supports life. You know, think about it again. So we're talking about going to Mars. Well, we have to change the Mars environment in order for humans to even begin to think about that. I mean, the whole idea of even going into space changes, you know, for us, how we can perform in that environment. And that's on the radical side. But here on planet Earth, we need to be able to create stability. And so I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. In the world I'm talking to you about, having coal miners sit out in West Virginia suffering because they can't find a future and agonizing is not a way to run a society. It's just not. And so you breed dislocation. The mortality rate is going up. That's not how a society, a modern industrial society, ought to operate. We are all dependent upon each other. And so we have to be sensitive that when we have parts of our society that are in change, we have to deal with it. The biggest revolution that's coming is these self-driving cars. They are going to revolutionize transportation. All those truck drivers that you get annoyed at, that I hate on 95, they're going to disappear. And those jobs are going to disappear. So what do you do then? You just leave them there? You just don't think about it? You don't prepare for it? That's not appropriate. And in the same way, we all knew we had this baby boomer bubble coming. I remember Claude Pepper, right? In the 1980s, Claude was saying, you know, look at what's going to happen to Medicare. We have not prepared for it. We've not done what we should do. And that's what I'm talking about, that we have to be thinking. We have to work collectively. We have to not dig our heads in the sand and ignore the challenges. We have to grab hold of them. I'm excited about medicine in the 21st century. The stuff that's going on out there is just spectacular. I mean, they are starting to edit the genome. The program of life, we're going in there and we are reprogramming it. That's powerful stuff. Takes a lot of money, takes a lot of investment, but it says to me that we have enormous capacity. The challenge, of course, is how do we pay for that? So I sit there myself and I go, well, I can invest in Candy Crush. Okay, I love football. I mean, I can spend a lot of money on the NFL. That's kind of fun, right? Or we could put some money in the Genome Project and really get ahead of the game and give our children a future in which they control their fate. I mean, those are the choices we have to make, right? We have to decide. I remember I once talked to Dr. Sullivan, who was a great mentor, and he said to me, healthcare is, at the time, I guess it was 17% of GDP. And he was going to talk to Congress because it was 17. I said, so what? So what? Suppose it's 30% of GDP. We are investing in our future. We're building something, and it will take money. It will take resources to do. And I think we have to talk to our neighbors about the investment we are making in our future, because medicine is the infrastructure that will drive sustainability. And we have to make that investment. And it is the 21st century because we have the capacity now to do that. And I think that's important. And finally, we have to deal with this issue. When we talk about food deserts, there are medical deserts out there. There are medical deserts that we have allowed because we've decided, for whatever reason, some of them philosophical, some of them whatever, that parts of our society should not have health care. I'm going to say this not as a political comment, but I'm sure everybody's going to take it as a political comment, and maybe it is a political comment. But when an elected official stands in front of you and tells you that he doesn't believe that everybody should have health care, that's a profound statement that you should understand in its full implications. Because what he's saying is that I'm prepared to let Americans die. I'm prepared to let them have miserable lives. Because if you don't have health care, you can get rescue care, right? I'm not talking about rescuing them after they have diabetes and the sugar has burnt their heart and their kidney. I mean, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about helping them to live long, high-quality lives. So what you're going to hear during the course of this meeting is that we are going into community with this message. We are going into community, we're targeting the underserved community because that's the least of us. That's where the struggle is, that's where the fight is. So we're going into those underserved communities where we see elevated diabetes, cancer, heart failure, and saying, how do we partner? How do we work collectively to make sure that these communities live in the 21st century, that they don't live in the 20th century where we don't have the capacity to do anything? And that's what we're saying to them. We want you to live in the past. We want them to live in the future. And it's going to be a struggle. Trust me, it's going to be hard in all kinds of ways. But at the end of the day, that is our future. That's what we're building. And if you don't think that's what we're building, then I don't know what you're doing. I'm lost. I don't get the point. I mean, we should all just lie on the beach and wait till the waves hit us or something. So we need your input. We're going to share with you what we're thinking about, how we're going about it, the collaborations that we're trying to build. We're also going to introduce you to people who are at the cutting edge of science, of social marketing, of communications. And what we really want you to do is think about what we're saying. And if it makes sense to you, help us, work with us, figure this out. Let's do this together. I think that's the most important thing. I've been doing this, as I said, 14 years. And I think this is our moment. This is what we've been working for. And now we have to take the energy to go forward. So anyway, I hope you enjoy this meeting. We've been thinking about it a lot. We hope that it lives up to expectation. And I, again, thank you for giving me the time.